Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of the Nationalist View, and today we have with us a very special guest, Ella Rosenberg. Ella, thank you so much for joining the show.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
So, Ella Rosenberg, she's a senior research fellow at JCFA and the Vora Forum member. She focuses her research on Iran and counter-terror financing, and we will be giving a detailed description of her bio in the description box. We'll also be sharing some links regarding some articles which she has written, and because we are going to talk about them also. So. We are going to talk about the current conflict which is going on in Middle East. We call it West Asia in this part of the world from New Delhi, where I'm joining. So I would be interchangeably using Middle East and West Asia, these two terms. So Ella, my first question is, you recently wrote an analysis titled "How Iran's Gamble is Reshaping Global Power and Elevating Israel." You have argued that Iran's actions, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, could reshape global power dynamics. So, could you decode this and explain this a little bit for our viewers?
Yes, I would go from the macro level to the micro level, mainly emphasizing the reason of why everyone's focusing on Hormuz lately. So specifically regarding the straits, it's not a very long strait, it's a 4 kilometer strait, and it's a very difficult strait in itself because the majority of the areas surrounding the strait itself is of Iranian, it's part of Iran, essentially. In addition to that, you need to bear in mind that part of the energy wars, you have two parts or two coalitions working here together. You have on the one hand Iran and China and Russia, and on the other hand, sorry, you have the states, United States, the GCC, and also Israel came into power into that specific area, and the European Union has decided to join in that specific effect. So you have these two powers that are trying to control the maritime strait, because whoever controls that strait will control the maritime trade routes, specifically for oil from the Middle East to and the GCC countries towards the rest of the world. And in addition to that, you need to bear in mind that the global shift in which Trump is taking the United States is to make sure that the United States has the upper hand when it comes to the specific trade routes between the States and China as part of the trade war as a whole. So that's a macro level. Micro level specifically, it's going to be a very interesting week, mainly because we're anticipating Marine troops going to land on the island of Hajj. And once that happens, it's going to be very interesting on how Trump will decide to mitigate the risk from Iran. And in addition to that, if he's going to allow any sort of vessels coming in and out from the straits, specifically for oil carriage, to states that are not associated with Iran.
So let's talk a little bit about the nuclear program because that is primarily the bone of contention
Mm-hmm.
and one of the key reasons which triggered this conflict, the Iran's nuclear program. So following the
Mm-hmm.
recent US-Israel strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, there are claims that Iran's program has been delayed, but also warnings that it may now accelerate covertly because there are also conversations around dirty bombs. But in your assessment, is Iran closer to a nuclear weapon today than before the conflict, or is it further away?
Well, to that effect, I don't think there's anyone who knows. I think the only person who has some sort of indication whether they're closer or not to a nuclear bomb is either President Trump or the Iranians themselves, in the sense that you need to bear in mind that even if you create a nuclear bomb, it's a very long process. So, first of all, you need to create the nuclear warhead, you need to create the specific materials that should be sent. It's a process in itself. So, to that effect, that will happen. You need to bear in mind that you also need an amount of enriched uranium. And to what we've heard from recent reports worldwide, the Iranians were very close of reaching that specific level of enrichment, and now they're not, because to what people, the United States claim is that they managed to remove that specific threat. Is that something that we can rely on? I don't think so, because as you can see throughout the previous war that we had with Iran for the 12 days war, certain things that were said that were very inconsistent with reality. So we need to see how things develop. We need to see what will happen with the nuclear plan. I do think that if the United States and Iran decide to come into an agreement with with this conflict. I do believe there'll be some discussions on the nuclear plan. Maybe they would like to remove it or send it to a different country. But I do think that there won't be any discussions regarding the missile program. And that's a very big problem for Israel because we're as concerned about the missile program as we are the nuclear problem. But for the United States, it's a different kind of issue because they're scared of the trade wars and the energy wars when it comes to the oil. We're also concerned about that, but we're more concerned about missiles above our heads. So that's my intake on this specific issue.
And if we, let's take something, a subject, especially, where you have been focusing on the counterterrorism funding. Uh, so let's talk about war economy and the proxy financing. So a key pillar of Iran's regional strategy has been financing groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis through oil revenues, smuggling networks, and IRGC-linked financial systems. Now, given the current war, sanctions, and disruptions to the energy flows, has Iran's capacity to fund these proxies weakened, or is its shadow financial architecture proving resilient?
I think on this question specifically, only on this specific topic, we can discuss for 3 hours. But if we would like to mitigate the amount of time that we have, I think I would like to make a few points to that effect. So, firstly, I would like to make the point that there's a difference between the RGC economy and the Iranian economy. Of course, the RGC are part of Iran because they are the ruling party of Iran. But you also need to bear in mind that the Iranian economy is not the RGC. It's two different things. When sanctions are imposed, they're imposed mainly as a secondary designation. Designation is a type of sanctions on specific companies or people within Iran, but the country Iran as a whole is also sanctioned by the US. That's a starting point. Once the rebellion in January against the regime and the demonstrations against the regime has reached a peak, and to that effect, the Iranian regime has massacred almost 40,000 people during these demonstrations. The European Union has decided to designate specific people in Iran against the regime. Why is it a little too little and too late? Because it's not something that they have just woken up to in a single day. It's something that they have known before. And in addition to that, they're only doing it now as human rights violations, although those human rights violations were there in the past. So that's specifically when it comes to sanctions. And this leads to the very interesting topic of shadow banking. Because once you are sanctioned as an entity, you're not allowed to trade with the usual banking or the classical banking system. So this is where the IRGC is acting as a money launderer. And as a good money launderer, they're trying to find ways or methods to transfer their funds from one point to another. And this is where the shadow banking comes into place. And you see their operations worldwide. You see it in the UAE, you see it in Qatar, you see it in Turkey, you see it with Forex trading, you see it with crypto trading, you see it even with human trafficking trading with the Basij from Pakistan. And you see it from other methodology. Amongst those methodologies is the oil trade that you see that's coming in and out from the Straits of Hormuz. So if you look on that point specifically, once a war has begun and European sanctions has already been in place, you need to bear in mind that in my opinion, the position of the IRGC as organization has weakened. But as recent publications shows very clearly that the heads of the RGC or the Azadeh, which are the young and the beautiful, and I call the bold and the beautiful of the RGC, you can call them that way. They have a significant amount of funds worldwide. They have it in Europe, they have it in the UK, and they're essentially living their vast life and their best life in a Gossip Girl type of style, in a very lavish and in your face methodology of way of living. And this is something that's also annoying the Iranian people because they're essentially starving while their relatives of the RGC are living their lavish lives in London and in Amsterdam and wherever it is. So if you look at their position has not changed drastically. They're essentially living in the same way. In my opinion, if you want to tackle the RGC properly, you need to tackle that problem first of their wealth and then the RGC as a whole.
So if we look at, you differentiated between the IRGC economy and the Iranian economy. And that's a very valid, basically, point. So now, if we look at taking this discussion further, the Iranian economy, because Iran was also, as a country, apart from IRGC, financing the proxies, and also spending a lot of money, of course, on developing its arsenal also. So, now with intensified sanctions and battlefield pressures, is there credible evidence that funding pipelines to Iran-backed groups have been materially, degraded? And
Yes,
also, are we witnessing a shift toward more decentralized, covert, and self-sustaining financing models that makes, these networks harder to track and counter?
I would say something deeply unpopular, and I hope that's okay. Once the IRGC are funding a specific terror group, that terror group is enjoying the vast network of the IRGC, whether it's the forex funding or the oil routes or whatever it is. Now that Hezbollah has become very weak during this war, and the Houthis are essentially non-existent. And in addition to that, you also have Hezbollah in Iraq that are losing power. As an Indian citizen, I would be very, very scared of what the RGC would start doing in Pakistan, mainly because if they would like to increase their credibility and increase their power as a regional power, because this is what the RGC wants. If I were them, my best bet were terror groups in India funded by Pakistan. And I know this is something that's deeply unpopular. I know this is something that has not been talked about, but I would be very worried about it as an Indian citizen. And this is something that the government of India should take into consideration. Also, bearing in mind that India has for years um, use the oil coming out of Iran for specific purposes and play some sort of double game, if I may say so, in a sense that in one end it wanted to work with the sanctions of the United States, but also benefit from the oil in Iran for better or for worse. So I think it's a matter of policy. That's one thing, and I do see it as a strategic game in the sense that once Hezbollah has become more weak and the Houthis are non-existent and Hezbollah of Iraq are becoming even more weak, they will try to find different terror groups worldwide that will harm Israel, but also friends of Israel. Because India and Israel are very similar, but very different, but I think we're more similar than different, and we're strategic partners in the continent named Asia. So I think this is something you should bear in mind.
So, my last question is, let's talk about, though it's a very hypothetical kind of a situation. So everybody's talking about, the end game in this conflict. And, they say that, you can start wars on your own, but then, wars take their own course. And sometimes then the wars decide when they are going to get finished. And especially, when there is a protracted and prolonged, battle. So, looking ahead, what are the most plausible, endgame scenarios? So there is a stable deterrence equilibrium, internal destabilization within Iran, or a nuclear breakout. And crucially, how does the future of Iran's proxy network fit into this? Does financial strain limit groups like Hezbollah, or does it push them towards greater autonomy and escalation?
I think this comes back to the underlying question that every citizen in Israel, but also every citizen, concerned citizen in the world, is now asking himself: is when will this war end and what will be the repercussions? And I think the end game here is different for Israel and the United States. So for the United States, it's very simple. It's an energy war type of thing. They would like to control the Hormuz Straits. It's also important for them to make sure that there's no nuclear plan, but they are showing signs that they don't really care about the missile plan. The end game for Israel is essentially making sure there's no nuclear plan and no missile plan because it's direct and utter hindrance of our sovereignty. So this is something that we would like to happen. We care less about the energy wars because it does have an effect on us, but not as much as you would like to see. That's the end game, for United States and Israel, which is very different, also similar but also different. And I think that for the European Union, their end game specifically is to see that the entire area is stabilized. They have an obsession with stabilization. I understand it. I love living in a stable area. Um, but you need to bear in mind this is not the way it works in the Middle East. And it's not the way that it works in this part of the world. So in order for us to live in peace, we need to make sure that our enemies are weaker than us. That's how it works. And specifically for the question of whether the proxies will come and go, I think it comes back to the previous question that you asked, is what are those proxies worthy for the RGC? Because we would like to see the RGC eliminated. We would like to see the regime overthrown. But if the regime remains in power after this war, which is going to be a huge setback to everything that we've trying to achieve during this war, I think they would put a less emphasis on their already delinquished proxies and find new ones. And this is where India should put a huge emphasis on Pakistan and to see what kind of elements and what kind of work and methodologies you can do in the area of counter-terrorist financing to enhance your safety as a nation.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you so much for joining from Israel. Especially these are challenging times, and you have taken time out and decoded such complex issues. And we hope to we hope to host you back on our show soon. And stay safe
Thank you.
and all the best. And thank you so much again for joining the show.
Thank you. Good evening.